In this video, we're going to create our wax material using subsurface scattering, and as a bonus, we're going to work on a very simple subsurface scattering skin shader. Okay, welcome back. So we have some materials to create for our candle. Now, our candle object actually requires two materials. We need a material for the wick and we need a material for the wax. So with this object selected, let's create a new material. Let's call this wick. We'll change the base color to black. We'll put the roughness all the way up. And you can see it's changed the entire object. So what happens if we want to add a different material to a different part of an object? A really easy way to do it, especially on an object like this where we don't have much geometry, is to go to edit mode. Select the geometry that you actually want to be a different material. So in this case, it's going to be the wax part. We are going to go to X-ray mode or wireframe mode so we can see as much of the object as possible. We have some parts already selected, so I'm going to hit A and go to the select all toggle to unselect everything, and then we'll just click and drag and select this bottom face. We're going to use Control and plus, and that's going to increase our selection, and we just want to increase that selection until we get to the bottom of the wick. So we have everything but the wick on that object selected. Now in our properties panel, under material, we can click here and we see a list of all the materials on our object. Now at the moment we only have the wick selected. We're going to hit plus, and this adds a second material slot to our object. We can also access different material slots from this drop down here. We're going to add a new material. This is going to be called wax. We're going to take our base color and make it slightly off white, kind of yellowish. Now we need to apply it to this object, so let's turn off wireframe mode, go back into rendering mode so we can see the result of this. Let's select our wax object and hit assign, and now that assigns it to that part of the object. Let's make sure our wireframes are off. Let's go back into object mode, or we could use the tab hotkey to switch between different modes. So now we have this wax material, but it doesn't look that great. One of the main properties of wax is it's actually semi-translucent. The light actually bounces into it and gets transmitted through it. So anywhere where we have kind of thinner areas, you're going to see a lot of this light coming through and picking up different colors from the interior of the object. This is something you'll see if you hold your hand up to the light. You can start to see a red halo around your fingers where the light is penetrating your skin and it's picking up the colour of the flesh beneath your skin and bouncing that back out to the surface, which is why your skin starts to look red. So we are going to deselect this object by hitting A, select all. We still have our material over here. We're going to take the roughness down a little bit to make it a little bit more shiny. And we're going to increase our subsurface amount a little bit. So as you can do that, you start to see this redness coming into the edges of our object. Now, one thing I'll point out is now our sampling is taking a lot longer. If we look through our camera, what you can see here is we're getting that red effect here. We can increase our subsurface scattering as much as we want to get even more of that. But our rendering is taking a little bit of a hit. And that's just something that you have to deal with when you deal with subsurface scattering. Now there are ways that we could fake this. We've already seen that we used an emissive material here on the flame. Potentially you could blend in an emissive value to just the top area of the candle, so that would start self-illuminating, and that could be a good way to fake subsurface scattering, and that's especially good if your object is in the background of a scene and it's not going to be the main focus. When it is the main focus, subsurface is going to be the way to go, and you're going to have to just deal with longer render times. Now you can see with denoising turned off, you can see just how long this would take to get a really clean render. That was 1000 samples and it's still very, very noisy. So you can imagine just how noisy it would be, how long the render would be to get that completely clean. Denoising does a decent enough job of cleaning it up, but you can still see some artifacts there. You can see some blues and greens creeping in. So that is basically our very basic wax material. So again, we're going to do the same process that we have been doing, which is we take our object, in this case our cylinder, go to our mesh. You can see in this case we have two different materials on it. The wax material is the one that we want to keep. So we're going to right click and mark that as an asset. I want to also mark your candle as an asset. We could change it from cylinder to candle. So now we actually have our candle as an asset. So if I was to open up a new file, let's save this one first. New file, general. Let's change this over to an asset browser. We have all our assets already in there, so you can see that we have our candle right there. Let's get rid of that. And let's drag our candle right into our scene. And you can see that will just appear directly there. We'll turn on our video and you can see we have our candle right in there. You can see a little bit of the subsurface scattering happening just from the scene lights. So that's another example of just how useful the asset browser can be. Okay, so challenge time. So this is going to be a fun one. Now we've created our wax material just using base color, subsurface scattering, and adjusting the roughness. Your challenge is to add in the Suzanne monkey head object into the scene and adjust the base color, the subsurface scattering, and the roughness to try and create your own skin shader. So experiment with some different settings and see if you can get an effect that you like. Stick around for a moment and I'll show you my result. If you're happy with your skin shader, just name it and mark it as an asset. Okay, so I hope you had fun with that challenge. I'm back now in the course materials file. I'm going to turn my lights back on. So I just want to move my candle for the moment. I'm going to actually add a new collection and I'm just going to call this objects and just move the candle in there. Now the cube is in there as well, so I'll add that in. We also have a sphere in the scene, which is our flame. So I'm just going to rename that as well. And I'll just move that back into objects. Now I'm going to hide the candle and I'm going to hide the flame. And we're just going to use the Suzanne monkey head. So we have our 3D cursor already in place. So I'm going to click Shift S to add. Go to mesh. And we'll grab that monkey head. And it comes in really rather huge. We're going to add the subdivision surface modifier to this object. I'll give it a couple of subdivisions and I'll shade it smooth. Let's just move it up a little bit in the scene. Rotate it a little bit in Z. And I do want to make sure that I can see the edges of the ears. We're going to scale this down. Remember to always try and scale in edit mode. We'll scale this down a little bit. I don't actually mind that it's floating above the surface. That's actually fine. Let's rotate it just a little bit. Background. There we go. I think that's going to work okay. So let's add a material to that. Now we have our wax material as a base. So let's select our wax material. And let's duplicate that wax material. So now it's renamed Wax 001. We lose that asset browser icon. We're going to call this skin. So base color, we're going to select a kind of flesh kind of tone. So a kind of off pink type tone. Our skin is very reflective here. So let's take this roughness all the way up. So it's almost completely rough. At the moment I have this pink light in the scene and it may be causing issues seeing how the subsurface works. So I'll just find that in the outliner. It should be light, it's a light 001. And let's just change the color of that down to white. And let's also change the power to 200. And now we should be able to see the effect of the subsurface scattering just a little bit better. We have our subsurface scattering at 0.3. We can increase that as much as we want, really. Let's take it to about 0.45. And at the moment what we're seeing is we're just seeing the surface color of the object coming through. Let's change the subsurface color to something a bit more red. Maybe make it a little bit deeper. So now we're getting something a little bit more like flesh. Now obviously just using a base colour, a little subsurface scattering in colour and roughness does not make a great skin texture. We don't have any pores, we don't have any wrinkles or anything like that on the object. But just as a very quick example of the way subsurface scattering works, I think this works out okay. Let's just put this down a little bit. Yeah, I think I quite like something like that. Now, just to show off the subsurface scattering even more, I'm going to take this point light and I'm just going to move it behind the object. Let's move this down and just put it right behind the ear. Now, at the moment, this is a point light, so we're getting a really strong reflection there. But you can really almost see through the ear at this stage. So maybe here we could even tweak some of these settings a little bit more, make it a little bit more subtle. So you can see if we go up really high, we're almost seeing through to the colour of the light, which is not what we want. We want that red tint. So maybe something like this is a little bit better. That's picking up a lot more of this subsurface colour. So that's just a simple skin shader. So I hope you learned a lot in that last video. In the next video we're going to move on to cloth materials. But in order to preview our cloth shaders correctly, we're going to have to create a cloth object. And the way we're going to do that is by creating a very simple cloth simulation. So join me in the next video.